I'm tempted to say smart, creative people have no particularly different set of character traits than the rest of us, except for being smart and creative. And then, on the other hand, I wrote a biography of Richard Feynman and a biography of Isaac Newton. Now, there are two great scientific geniuses whose characters were, in some superficial ways, completely different. Isaac Newton was solitary, antisocial, bitter, fought with his friends as much as with his enemies. Richard Feynman was gregarious, funny, a great dancer, loved women. Isaac Newton, I believe, never had sex. Richard Feynman, I believe, had plenty. So you can't generalize there. On the other hand, as I tried to get in their heads, understand their minds, the nature of their genius, I sort of felt I was seeing things that they had in common. And they were things that had to do with aloneness. Newton was much more obviously alone than Feynman, but Feynman didn't particularly work well with others. He was known as a great teacher, but he wasn't a great teacher, I don't think, one-on-one. I think he was a great lecturer. I think he was a great communicator. But when it came time to make the great discoveries of science, he was alone in his head. And this applies also, I think, to the geniuses that I write about in the information. Charles Babbage, Alan Turing, Ada Byron. They all had the ability to concentrate with a sort of intensity that is hard for mortals like me to grasp. A kind of passion for abstraction that doesn't lend itself to easy communication, I don't think.
What does genius mean to me? I think there are many brilliant people in the world, many people who are very, very intelligent. So I think it has to do with a line of dialogue that I think we have in the first episode, which is a genius is not just answering questions, but asking questions that nobody else thought to ask.
You kind of know whenever you witness somebody being really, really excellent at something, it's a profound experience to be able to be around it, you know, and I think that to me really is watching somebody doing something special.
Most people agree that whoever the geniuses are, and you could say it's the people that can combine ideas that are staring everyone else in the face, but they somehow connect something that no one's even thought about. I found the quote that Schopenhauer made. He has this great quote where he says, "Talent hits a target that no one else can hit. Genius hits a target that no one else can see."
Do you think you're a genius?
If there's such a thing as one, I am one, you know.
When did you first realize?
When I was about 12, you know, I used to think, I must be a genius, but nobody's noticed. And I thought, well, I'm a genius or I'm mad. Which is it? I said, I can't be mad because nobody's put me away, therefore I'm a genius. I mean, genius is a form of madness, and we're all that way, you know. If there's such a thing as genius, which is just what the fuck is it? I am one, you know, and if there isn't, I don't care.
Episode 62 of Glass Onion on John Lennon, and this is a special one today because we have just passed the second anniversary of Glass Onion. As I mentioned last time, the first episode went out on February the 7th, so just a little bit past 2 years. Put out pretty much 70 episodes if you include the bonus ones, and doesn't look like we're going to be stopping anytime soon, even though I keep threatening to. So today's show is the welcome return of Dan Richter. Before I go to that though, backed by popular dementia, bit of guitar. I'm going to demonstrate just something very, very simple today. It's a songwriting trick, and it's the major to minor move in the same chord. So for example, A major to A minor, or it can go the other way as well. Now this is popularly known as the miracle move, or if you go minor to major, it's a Picardy third. I'm trying to sound like I know what I'm talking about here, but there's actually a very good video about this on the David Bennett piano channel on YouTube, and he gives a few examples of this. The way he explains it is you have a section that's in a minor key to A minor, and then it ends on A major. And he said, in fact, there's 3 on the Hard Day's Night album. And I love Things We Said Today, which I covered a few episodes back on another guitar thing where you had A minor and then suddenly you go to the bridge, A major. Sort of brightens everything up. It goes from a slightly gloomy mood. And we had Besame Mucho, we were talking about that as well. And then I'll Be Back as well on that album. And then he says about Day in the Life as well, the section that precedes the very end, the orchestra build-up, is essentially in a minor key, although it's kind of all over the place. That was pretty much the point. And then it ends, of course, on that massive E major chord. Anyway, just a few examples here. There's a couple of songs that the Beatles would have done in the early days. If you've heard the 1960 tape, which nobody's still quite sure whether there were 1 or 2 sessions where they were, I always thought it sounded like it might have been in Gambier Terrace or at the Art College, because it sounds very spacious, like high ceilings and so forth. Although some of that may have been just the primitive recording technology. But they do I'll Always Be in Love with You, which I think is an old song. I don't think that was an original. And it's like, if you could find your way 1,000 million miles away. So there you go. So you got A to A7, D major, D minor. I will always be in love with you. And there's 1 or 2 songs of that time which are more or less just the 3 chords that you'd find in 12-bar blues that I was describing last time. Not necessarily being blues songs, but just those 3 chords that you can just make a million songs with. Another one is Blue Moon to Kentucky, which there's not really any recording of the Beatles doing, but they must have jammed it. And of course the Three Tools jammed it in 1995. Famously, just the short version, as George requested. I'll play whatever you want me to play, Paul, as long as it's a short version. So, and Paul, in fact, did it very well on the Unplugged. He starts off in a waltz. Blue moon of Kentucky, keep on shining. Shine on the way that's gone, lovely blue. And then he sort of takes a pause and then rocks it up. Blue moon, blue moon, blue moon, keep it shining bright. Blue moon, keep on shining bright. Send my baby back tonight. And there's the minor. Third, A7, D major, D minor, blue moon, keep it shining bright. Very similar to I'll Always Be in Love with You. Sometimes in the same key as well. The Beatles played that in A, and the original Blue Moon Kentucky is in A. The other example of an old song that the Beatles did do is Ain't She Sweet. So you're in E, and then the bridge is just cast an eye in her direction. Not 100% sure the Beatles played that minor one, but in other versions of the song, you hear that. So you're in key of E, as I said, so the bridge goes just cast an eye, A major, A minor, in her direction. So you got it there. And then in the Beatles' recorded output, original songs, one of the most famous is All my life, well, some have changed in my life, obviously. So A, E, F sharp minor, A7, and then this bit. All my life, D major, D minor. Though some have changed. Some would call it perhaps a lazy trick. Perhaps nowadays, if you can't think of something to do, if you're on your D, you just go to D minor and then back to A, so you'd be in the key of A there. But, it's still pretty nifty. I liken it to modulations, key changes. When it's just done for the sake of it, the song can't go anywhere else. Then it can seem like a real cop-out, but when used correctly, then it's great. A couple of other examples. If I Fell, 'cause I couldn't stand the pain, and so that's, and the pain, G major to G minor, would be sad if our new love was in vain. And then you've got Well, this is not a Beatles original, but Till There Was You. And there was music and wonderful roses. So B flat minor, F. This one I'm not sure about. I'll Follow the Sun. So one day you'll look to see I've gone, and now the time has come, and so my love I must go. I took that as D minor, F minor, C, but it could be time has come, and so my love I must go. F major to F minor to C, and then of course 30 years later you get Oasis. Gonna start a revolution from my pen. And the solo for that is very much like the C pentatonic of Let It Be. That's why I'm a rhythm guitarist. So that's major to minor or minor to major. As we saw before, you know, if you've got a gloomy, melancholic song in the minor, you can cheer everything up with a major. Conversely, if it's a generally happy song in major, you can just add that tiny bit of darkness or melancholy to it with the relative minor of the chord you're on. Anyway, on today's show, so as I said, this is Dan Richter, who famously both lived with John and Yoko for a few years in the late 60s and early 70s, and was also famously Moonwatcher in 2001 Space Odyssey. The idea I came up with was to talk about the concept of genius, and I don't really need to say any more. Again, the voice in my head is telling me not to put too many spoilers in. But the clips you just heard there, the first one was James, I don't know how you pronounce that, Gleick, Gleick, comparing a couple of scientists talking about how there's certain traits of geniuses, but they're not all the same. And what Dan says something very similar later on, in fact. The second one was, I think it was a clip for a TV series about Einstein. Jeffrey Rush is going to be playing Einstein. And then a brief clip of John, of course, in the Lennon Remembers interview. The thing about that interview is that he did go back on a lot of what he said, and Jan Wenner rather scandalously has reissued it a few times, put out a book of that interview without any acknowledgement that John had basically said that he was lying, or at least, you know, exaggerating. But I do believe that John probably did think he had something a little bit special or unusual, let's say. But genius is a tricky word to throw around. I mean, it's all in the interpretation, of course. But this is a great discussion. There's lots of Kubrick, for you Kubrick fans out there. And Dan and I talk about other things. We talk about acting, talk about truth in acting. We talk about animals at one point. Of course, he learned a lot by being this ape in 2001 A Space Odyssey, and he said in the first chat we had about that, you can learn a lot by studying animals. So we get into stuff like that. It's a little bit of Paul McCartney as well. And we look at some of the links between genius and some other personality traits or states. So just before we get into the episode, if you'd like to help out the show, PayPal donations are extremely appreciated. There's a link on the SoundCloud page, otherwise glassonionpod@yahoo.com, and that's the email for feedback as well. So without further ado, I'm going to let you get on with listening to the second anniversary show of Glass Onion with Dan Richter. Enjoy. Hi everybody, welcome to Glass Onion on John Lennon, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back to the program Dan Richter. Dan was on episode 16, it's about maybe a year and a half ago. He was also an unofficial advisor on the review we did of the Riding So High book. That was episodes 49 and 50. So Dan, how are you doing?
You know, I'm doing great, Anthony. Yeah, how about you?
Yeah, doing pretty good. It's very productive. I was going to ask you in a second about what are the pros and cons of quarantine. Obviously, it's a terrible time for the world, and I don't think we're going to fully get the economic ramifications for a few months. But we were joking before that you're in your 80s, you told me, so you're officially a menace to society in 2020.
Yeah, yes, I'm one of those ones that tends to die, you know, when
right.
things this big, you know. So it's a bother because it's forcing restaurants. I feel I'm personally forcing restaurants to close,
right,
and young people not to be able to party, and you know.
Yeah.
The guilt is weighing heavy on my soul.
So what have you been doing in these months? Have there been any positives? Don't know, reflection time, or have you had enough reflection time maybe?
Yeah, I have been quarantining. I've been very rigorous. It's a little easier now that we sort of understand it a little better, so that I'm not afraid to touch a doorknob, and things like that as much. I'm wearing a mask. I'll briefly go in and out of places and things like that. But I still am pretty much in quarantine most of the time. And I suppose there are benefits. I walk around my neighborhood a lot. I live up in a canyon with bears and bobcats and mountains all around me. So I walk every day around, and I take longer and longer walks. And I've lived here in this particular spot in the canyon for 10 years, and I realized in the last few months I've gotten to know my neighbors better than I have in 10 years. And there's a sense of community that's arisen. Like suddenly I see a friend pull up with a card saying, well, we're delivering meals to old folks. Would you like a meal? It's like, no, I think I'm all right. I'm getting a lot of deliveries. So,
Right.
So there's that. And also, I've become much better at jigsaw puzzles.
All right.
My fading mental capacity, it's one more thing to help keep it up.
No, I've kind of gone back to chess myself.
Yeah, I went through a period for about 2 or 3 years when I was living at the Chelsea Hotel. I had a friend who was a really good chess player, and he would come over every day and we would play chess, smoke a joint, play some chess. And he enjoyed it because he could beat me so easily. So it boosted his ego every day. Then the day came when I finally beat him, and he went off totally humiliated and mortified and whatnot. And then we reached a point where you never knew who was going to win that day. I got pretty good at it. I thought, whoa, I'm going to get into chess now. Yeah. And I reached the point where I realized I would then have to memorize thousands of openings if I wanted to get to the next level, because the people I would now have to play, knew the first 5 moves of just about every opening you could do. At that point, I began to lose interest.
I just thought of this while you were talking. Of course, we're going to be talking about the word genius, or the concept of genius, and we'll get to that in a second. But of course, when I thought of chess, I always think of Bobby Fischer. And on YouTube, there just appeared a clip of Bobby Fischer on the Dick Cavett show. I'm a big fan of the Dick Cavett show from those times anyway. And Dick Cavett said to him, can you give us a crash course in chess? And Bobby Fischer proceeds to give a kind of 100-mile-an-hour crash course. You can't imagine Bobby Fischer somehow being a teacher. And this actually does link with what we're going to be talking about today, because of the idea that people with high ability are often not very good at teaching because they don't know what they're doing, essentially. They just do it naturally.
This is a chessboard, and I know you can't imagine a person not knowing what it all means. Can you give someone a crash lesson?
Okay, what do you want to know?
I'd like to know what these things are called. No, I know all that.
Well, we looked at the pawns.
Yeah.
This is the rook, knight, bishop, queen, king. Okay?
Yeah.
And pawn moves like 1, 2 at the first move. Captures diagonally.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the pawns. It becomes a queen when you reach the end.
Yeah.
Or a knight, or a rook, or a bishop. Cannot become a king, cannot stay a pawn. Okay?
Okay, got it.
And a few other little things with pawns. Okay. Knights move like it's kind of like an L.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Bishops, they move diagonally, like so.
You handled them beautifully.
Thank you. Now, kings move 1 square in any direction. But generally, you keep the king way back until the end game, because if you lose the king, you lose the game. That's what it's about. Now, let's see. The rook moves like this, straight.
Oh, always straight. Can't jump.
And the
Can't
queen moves like a bishop,
Yeah.
like so, and like a rook. It's a very powerful piece. It has tremendous scope.
Yeah.
Chop his pawn off if it wants.
As I understand, at the end of your match with Petrosian, something or other turned into queens. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, well, I was going to. See, when we play top-level chess, once you're dead lost, you don't drag it out to the bitter end, to the checkmate. You resign. It's kind of a gentlemanly thing to do.
Is there a finite number of possible chess games?
They say there is, I don't know, something with 2 numbers and then I don't know how many, 100 zeros or something. I don't know. I think there is a limited number, but it's more than the mind can fathom.
When you've taken intelligence tests in school, what parts of them do you score highest on?
I don't know. They never gave me the report.
You never take the standard test?
I think I took it, but they never give you the report.
Yeah.
I think I was good with these, have these little square boxes and puzzles and this kind of thing.
Is that what they call spatial
relations?
Those things where they say how many sides are not showing on this thing.
And then they were giving me, I remember this when I was a little kid, they were giving me numbers. and told me to tell them backwards, and they were made shooting them off backwards fast.
But you don't happen to, you're not particularly good at word games.
Not particularly. I mean, I'm really specialized. I don't really care too much about these things.
Yeah. Sorry, I talked about it.
Fisher, of course, I think it's fair to say had some problems with mental illness, and that's another thing we'll get to. Stanley Kubrick, of course, one of our subjects, he was famously a very good chess player, and apparently, perhaps you can tell me if this is true, often he would challenge an actor to a game of chess at the beginning of shooting in a kind of way to get the upper hand. Have you ever heard that? Or
I hadn't heard it particularly that way. But it's funny. I spent, I guess, 15 months with Stanley every day, and we never played chess. And never discussed it even, well, we talked about everything under the sun, but not that. I think he just assumed that he could beat me so easily. And I don't think I was very young, and he didn't feel in any way intimidated by me. But I know he would play with George C. Scott and a number of people. There's always pictures of him playing with actors, but I hadn't heard that. It sounds like Stanley. I mean, Stanley was really into controlling things for good reasons. It's not that he was a control freak that wants to control people. It's that he wanted to get what he was doing so good and just so right. And he knew that he had to go to the higher level all the time. So he would do what was ever necessary within bounds to get there.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say some people are more comfortable with control and some people are more comfortable with chaos, perhaps. There's probably people who, if things were too orderly, they'd feel like they couldn't function. It's an interesting...
Stanley had trouble confronting people.
Right.
A perfect example of is George Carris, who was, the animal, the dog guy. He had been in publicity at Columbia Pictures when Spartacus was being shot. And he had been friends with Stanley then, and he was actually the guy who introduced Stanley and Arthur Clarke. And he was working on the periphery of 2001, doing a lot of research for Stanley, like the front projection system we used in The Dawn of Man. Roger was the one who had found that, I think, at 3M or something, this material, But anyway, I was talking to Roger about Stanley one day. I was visiting him, and he had a farm in Maryland. And he said he and Christiana had this cleaning woman.
Oh, yeah.
Where they lived at Abbott's Mead, who was just terrible. I don't know why she was terrible. Maybe she couldn't clean well or whatever. She was an obnoxious person. But he couldn't fire her, you see. So he said to Roger, would you fire her for me?
Yeah, you told me this last time you were on, actually.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, and he and Christiana went and stayed in a hotel for the night. Roger went in and paid the lady off and asked her to leave.
Oh, that's funny. I think one of the ladies on 2001, the stewardess with the famous pen scene?
Yeah.
I can't remember her name, but she said also in one of these many documentaries about the film, I don't know what happened between her and Stanley. I don't think they fell out, but something happened, and he would relay instructions about her via a third person. Yeah, very interesting. Before we get onto it, Dan, would you mind introducing yourself for people?
Yeah, I'm Dan Richter, and I'm probably best known for playing the role of the man-ape moonwatcher at the opening of 2001: A Space Odyssey, the Dawn of Man sequence, which I also choreographed for Stanley. I'm also, people want to talk to me about John and Yoko, the Lennons, because I was a friend of Yoko, and Yoko invited my wife Jill and I to come out and live with them at Tittenhurst Park. And we just had gone out for a brief period because we didn't have a place to stay. We'd just come back from the States, and we were friends with Yoko. And I ended up spending about 3.5 years living with them, and ended up doing some of the record covers like the Plastic Ono bands, and pretty much a line producer on a lot of their films, and rode shotgun with them through many adventures.
Yeah, there's lots of pictures and videos, in fact, of you during the Imagine project, isn't there? I mean, you were there when the Vietnam vet, was his name Claudio? Claudio.
And I just found out that he wasn't a Vietnam vet. Apparently, Claudio, which I think was his, according to this thing I read recently, was his last name. And he had mental problems. He lived in the Central Valley near San Francisco, and he was obsessed by John. Felt John was speaking to him and had to look into his eyes. And I don't know if I told you this already, but he began sending us the telegrams to John. I'm coming.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I need to see you, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And everybody said, oh, he'll never get here. He's coming from California. He's probably because we get a lot of crazy stuff all the time, I mean, John was like a magnet for crazy.
I can imagine, yeah.
And, I just got a feeling, this guy's going to turn up, And one day there's this sort of bedraggled guy with their hair and eyes and standing at the gate. And we said, you can't come in, And John was very concerned. He didn't want him to be hurt or, John was very sweet. He had a very caring side to him, And police said, oh, we'll take, don't hurt him, don't hurt him. So they took him into London and he came back and he just kept standing there. So I said to John Yoko one day, all he wants to do is look in your eyes, he says. And we had a film crew there, so we had a lot of people there, because we were shooting the Imagine film at the same time as the recording was taking place.
Yeah.
So we arranged, I got everybody set up by the front door, and we brought Claudio in. And he told John that, I want to look at your eyes, I think you've been sending me messages. And John said, I don't. I write for myself. I write about my own feelings and things like that. And it means things to people, but I'm not sending messages to you. And then John, again, this sweet side of him, he said, you look hungry. When was the last time you ate? And Claudio said, I don't know, whatever. He said, well, come on in, let's have, and we all went we had a big conservatory table in the kitchen, and he had breakfast with us, That seemed to do it, and then he left and went away. And I heard that later he lived in the Central Valley and he had some job in a planting pack or picking something or something like that. And they laid off or shut down this operation, and everybody got a little bit of money, a check or something like that. And he bought this ultra-light little plane and flew into a tree and died. That was the end of Claudio.
Jeez, when did that happen? What kind of year are we talking?
I don't know. And I've always been interested in it because we had originally thought that he was a Vietnam veteran.
That was the story, wasn't it?
PSD and whatnot. And I only recently heard this. I don't know if it's true or not, but it had the ring of truth to it. And I think it was written by his brother who, wanted to set things straight and tell his story. We were trying to trace him, and we found it was coming from a hospital. And for some reason, somebody thought it was a veterans hospital.
Yeah, it's an amazing clip. I'll include a clip of that.
Yeah, it's really wonderful, and it shows a lot about John.
Don't confuse the songs with your own life. I mean, they might have relevance to your own life, but a lot of things do. So we met. I'm just a guy, man, who writes songs.
Yeah, I figured that if we met, I'd know just by reading.
But know what?
It all fits.
Anything fits. If you're tripping off on some trip, anything fits.
You can radiate everything you are. You can penetrate anywhere you go.
Yeah. I was just having fun with words. It was literally a nonsense song. See, that last album of mine was me coming out of my dream. You can last your whole life on that dream, and then it's all over.
They had a knack of taking situations and turning them into something all the time. Yesterday I did a thing with the BBC, and they had a picture of John Yoko in front of this car that they had been driving in Scotland that was crashed with the children. There were some pretty serious injuries, not broken bones, but cuts and.
Oh yeah, in '69. Yeah, that was when they had the bed in the bed in the studio, wasn't it? Famously.
Yeah, exactly. And they had this. BBC had this picture of the car which John Yoko had brought to Tittenhurst and was set up like a statue in the garden. And the two of them sitting in front of it, smiling, and John with the peace sign and everything like that. And the point for me is they had taken this terrible thing and turned it into a work of art and was pushing peace at the same time. And they did the same thing with Claudio, this poor man. Not only did they meet him and feed him, they filmed it and turned it, became part of Imagine. So they had this knack of always taking everything that was going on, bad or good, and turning it into something. Their life was art. Their art was their life.
So everything became like an event, you mean?
Yeah.
Like a creative event. I don't know if you know this, but going back to Dick Cavett again, of course, John and Yoko were on Dick Cavett twice, 71 and 72. Someone actually noticed that I think Claudio was in the audience in the first one.
I saw that, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure it was. I mean, a lot of people look like that in those days.
That's true. They're kind of, the kind of Jesus look. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty common.
Yeah.
And I saw that clip, and I was wondering the same thing, and I wasn't sure,
Yeah. One that I'm pretty sure about was in '69. I can't remember which TV show where John and Yoko went on with the bags.
Yes.
Well, no, sorry, they weren't in the bag. They had some other people in the bags, and one of them's definitely May Pang, because
May.
talking to
May
her.
was, working for them, and
That's right.
Yeah, they had May doing everything, getting in bags, going buying bathrobes, whatever.
That's right. All right. Oh yeah, just one thing about John. I imagine the BBC were interviewing you about the anniversary, were they?
Yes.
Yeah.
They had a picture of him with Chapman, the last picture taken.
Oh yeah, the autograph.
I really didn't feel like talking about it too much, I mean, Yoko has said that she would rather people remember his birthday rather than his death. And of course, but people are going to remember his death because he's so important to so many people. We were all so shocked by it.
I was going to say, I don't want to get too morbid. I don't want to dwell on this, but when you knew John, were you or was he ever in fear of his life? Did he ever feel like with his outspoken personality that something might happen? Or do you remember anything about that?
Yeah, I think so. It wasn't an obsession but when I was with him, we were always very careful. We'd be in the limo. I'll give you an example. We were staying at the Plaza Hotel, John, Yoko, and I. And John and Yoko had arranged to meet Bob Dylan, and he was going to be in the lobby of the Plaza. So we were in the car. We did not go to the main entrance. We went to the side entrance where the old Trader Vic's was on Central Park South. Stopped the car, and they stayed in the car. They stayed in the limo so nobody could see him. Nobody knew it was John Yoko. And I got out and looked around, just looking for weird people, Everything looked okay, so I went back and said, okay, let's go. The idea was to walk directly to things, not loiter or anything like that, So we walked in, and as we were walking across the lobby looking for Bob, suddenly this guy who looked like Jack Ruby with a hat and a suit came running towards us and stuck his hand inside his coat. And I thought, oh, shit. So I jumped up in front of him. I said, who are you? Talk to me, thinking I'm going to get shot now. And the guy pulls out this badge and says, I'm security. I'm here to help, which is anything you need. So we get in the elevator. Get in the elevator. Don't want to stick around here. And this guy with shades on and a hat pulled down and an army jacket gets in beside us, and he's laughing, and it's Bob, who had been there all the time, just completely anonymous.
Do you think they got on? Do they have a decent relationship, do you think, from what you
I think so. The thing is that musicians have something in common. They're all famous performers, and it's much easier for John Lennon to talk to Bob Dylan than to talk to just about anybody else, because just about anybody else is going to be going, I am talking to John Lennon.
Yeah, they're not going to be able to talk to him normally.
Yeah, well, anything you want. Yes, please. Thank you. And can you loan me $2,000? And so these two guys, they're both very famous, gifted musical geniuses who've had great success. And there are not many other people like that on the globe. And I saw this repeatedly, and quite often they would be friends with other performers who weren't so famous, but they shared the same thing. It was a camaraderie. It was quite natural.
Absolutely. Shared experiences, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially a shared strange experience, of being famous.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough being a rock and roll star.
Yeah.
It's got its downsides.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to do today, I don't know if you remember, but last time you were on, we ended the discussion. I said to you, imagine if John Lennon and Stanley Kubrick had met, would they have got on? And just listen to it today. You said to me they probably would have got on, but they would have been slightly wary because they would have known that the other one could do something better than them.
Yeah, well, it goes to what we were just talking about, the fact they're both geniuses, but in very different areas. Stanley watched television at night with the family, certainly at the time I knew him. So he was aware of pop culture, and we would discuss it, In fact, he wanted to borrow a flatbed I had got editing table put together for Stanley for Clockwork Orange, because he was moving from moviolas, which were the old editing machines, the flatbeds where you had a screen in front of you and you could control it, and it was, through a mutual friend, Malcolm Kafitz, at a camera store on Baker Street. He heard that I had this table put together for John Yoko with 3 heads, and it could use 35 and 16, and it was sort of a catch-all table. And so I took it out and loaded it while they were setting it up, and he and I spent the day together, and you could see he was very interested in John Lennon because this guy was famous in another way.
Mm.
We ended up talking more about security than, anything because, we were comparing shredding machines and things like that, because he was so obsessed with controlling everything, getting everything right. And if you wrote him a letter, he'd turn the letter over and write you a letter back and send the whole thing back to you.
Amazing. Did he ever mention the Beatles by name, can you remember, or John Lennon? Or would he talk about rock music?
He probably did, but I don't have a specific memory of it.
Mm. Okay. We're going to explore genius, and we're going to use John and Stanley as our kind of yardsticks, if you like. Now, genius is one of those words that gets overused. I'm reminded of the Woody Allen film, I think it's Manhattan, and Diane Keaton saying, oh, this guy's a genius, and oh, yeah, this guy's a genius. And Woody Allen says, well, a lot of geniuses, you should meet some stupid people. You might learn something. I did actually go to a dictionary to get a definition, and I am an English teacher, so I have an innate mistrust of dictionaries. But it says, among the other definitions, a very smart or talented person, a person who has a level of talent or intelligence that's very rare or remarkable. Dan, what would be your definition of genius? What's genius to you?
Well, actually, that's a pretty good one because my experience of having known a couple of geniuses is that they're not like each other. Each one is unique. If we take Stanley and John, for instance, they're totally different people, completely different.
Yeah.
But what they have in common is that they're different from everybody else. They're unique,
Yeah.
And the problem geniuses have is they don't know fully how they can do what they do.
Mm.
And so think about that. That's a tremendous potential burden for you because you don't know how you do it. They can occur in any area, but they're always unique. They're always just this person that's not like anybody else. John was like, he didn't even walk or talk or anything like anybody else.
Wow.
He was just like his own species. You saw it immediately when you were around him. He saw things in his own way. It's not like he's learned to see how to see things, and this is how everybody sees things. And now and then a light goes off and they see it in a slightly different way. He saw it in a different way all the time. He just had a unique way of looking at things constantly.
Yeah, the phrase you used last time you were on the show was another species. I must admit I borrowed that since, so thanks for that. I don't want to use too much hyperbole, but almost like they've been beamed down from somewhere, I kind of feel almost Jimi Hendrix was a bit like that. But what I want to sort of ask you about, I do want to present the opposite side of it. Let's take Bobby Fischer, for example. As far as I know, and I've read a couple of books on Fischer, essentially he didn't really do anything else other than play chess throughout his childhood. And I think he suffered later on in life because he had a kind of a lack of social skills. He was somewhat antisocial. And I was reading a book a few years ago it's called Bounce by an author called Matthew Syed. He's former table tennis player, actually, who I've met a few times. Let me give both sides of the coin and then tell me what you think. So if we take Mozart, for example, Matthew Syed's argument is that Mozart's father was a gifted composer and he was also somewhat tyrannical. So Mozart actually grew up playing piano or various instruments for 10 to 12 hours a day, according to some accounts. You get a talented father and you spend all your life doing one thing, you're going to be very good at it. But then if you take, for example, Beethoven, of course, Beethoven composed the Ninth Symphony when he was deaf. And the Ninth Symphony is like an hour long or something crazy like that. So what do you think about the opposite argument?
No, I don't go along with that because the Mozart thing, Mozart was a musical genius. They say that he couldn't write as fast as the music was coming out of his head. The coincidence was that he was born into a musical family, but one of the reasons his father Leopold was making him do all this stuff was he was capitalizing on the fact that Mozart was a musical genius. I mean, they were traveling around Europe and performing, and for Maria Theresa or whatever, he and Nannerl, his sister, they were the father's bread and butter. So Carroll was having to do the same things, but she wasn't a musical genius. She was just a nice girl who could play music.
I see.
Yeah.
I think maybe what we're coming to, there's a distinction between genius and very high ability. Because, famously there was a Russian guy who had twin girls and decided from the day they were born that he was going to turn them into chess grandmasters.
Mm.
Or I don't know if grand mistress, does that exist? I'm not sure. Maybe I just made that up.
Yeah.
So I suppose that would go with this argument in this book, in that in theory you could turn anyone into a chess grandmaster, but perhaps what you're talking about is not just high ability. I mean, are there any, how do I word this? Have you got any sort of anecdotal examples of what you might call genius from John or Stanley? I mean, is there anything you could point to, or is it just a general aura, would you say?
Well, Stanley always knew more. He was always not just the smartest guy in the room. And maybe he had learned this from chess, or maybe it was why he could play chess so well. He was always many moves ahead.
I see, yeah.
So, and he was also always very aware that when he said something, he knew exactly the implications of it and what would happen, and then what would happen, and then what would probably happen, and then what hope will happen. He was always out there all the time. When you were talking about it, I was thinking of Bob Dylan when he was talking about, some of those early masterpieces, like think Mr. Tambourine Man. Where does that come from? And he said, I don't know how I did that. He's a guy who's gone on performing all the time. And his later work is beautiful music, but they're not as good as that early stuff. It doesn't have that mystery, that specialness, that going to that other level. And he doesn't know how he did it.
Yeah.
And I think that geniuses don't know how. They didn't get there by building it, by training, by studying hard. Look, I used to teach acting at mime and acting at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And so every new semester, I'd have about 25 kids in my class, and they would come in. And I had an exercise that we used to do. So I'd say to you, I just want to figure out what I had, So I would stand in the middle of the studio and I'd say, okay, I want you to come up one at a time, stand right in front of me. You're not allowed to touch me. And tell me you love me so that I believe it. Okay, and then you can go sit down. So they would come up and, whatever, like that, do it.
Yeah.
And at that point, I knew that of those 25 people, these 24 will never going to make it.
Right.
Okay. This one had a chance, if they worked hard or whatnot, of probably doing pretty well at it. And this one is going to do it whatever happens, they're going to be, because I can't even explain why, but they've got it.
Yeah.
And it was that simple,
Yeah, I remember, actually, I went to drama school as well. And I remember we had to do this exercise where you lie on the floor and you have to not move a muscle, like you're not allowed to smile. You've got to maintain this. And everyone else in the class can do absolutely anything they want to you, and you've got to stay like that. And I was actually quite good at it, but I tell you, it was so nervous. I was so nervous. I won't even tell you what some of them did,
Yeah, well, acting's like that, and some people can do it. I mean, I think we mentioned earlier, it was Carrie Mulligan. I was watching an audition tape she had done, and it's the same thing. It's like, doesn't matter what she says or what she does, you just want to watch. And it's not because she's a good-looking woman and you like women or something like that. It's on a very human-to-human level. It's just, I care about what they're saying, and they have this ability to do that. And I'm sure she had that before she ever studied acting or anything.
It's something in the eyes, isn't it? It's something, I think I'm a bit more on the side of, you could train things to a certain extent. I do agree with you that there's that certain something. Would you have any idea where that comes from, or is it a complete mystery?
Well, first of all, humans, we have evolved over years of being able to read faces. We can see subtleties in faces. We can see extreme subtleties in faces. This is almost a protective thing to know this person is not a good person. So we read faces. And it's interesting, by the way, apropos of that, is that one of the differences between a dog and a wolf is a wolf looks at the human faces and is trying to figure out what the face is. A wolf won't do it. It hasn't evolved that. So we have this thing. So with actors, we look at them and they can't lie to us because we know whether it's truthful or not.
Yeah.
An actor can play a character, can allow a character to inhabit them, and that character may be a liar.
Right.
He can't lie to us, And one of the tricks we teach in acting is characterization. Characters are mysterious because when you do them right, they take over.
Yes.
And I always feel like I'm the actor, and then I work on my character, and then I let the character take over, and then it says things and does things that I never would have thought of. And so I can just relax a little bit and let the character take over. I may give it a push, nudge it in this direction or nudge it in this direction, but I have to let it be. And when that happens, it's magical. It works for an audience. I can go with it.
Yeah.
So that mystery, some people have it without having to play a character. They just have that mystery. That's a sense of truth to everything they do. They can't lie. And you think Meryl Streep, she has a sense of truth all the time. Doesn't matter what she's doing. We watch actors in movies, and it's all been directed and planned out and things like that. So it all looks natural. But you try to shoot get somebody to play a scene and get it to look like it's realistic and natural. That's a hard thing to do. So anyway, I think there's a mystery there, magical thing that we know and react to, but we can't really define.
Wow, very interesting. If we can go back to Stanley for a second, what was he like with actors? I mean, do you think he understood acting, or was he kind of like Hitchcock? Sort of actors were a necessary part of a film. Hitchcock famously...
Yeah, he called them cattle. Hitchcock.
Yeah, well, he was asked in an interview, and he said, "No, I didn't call them cattle. I said they should be treated like cattle."
Yeah. Well, Hitchcock, very different director. So first of all, Hitchcock, I guess, working with his wife Alma, would work out. He knew exactly everything that was going to happen beforehand, in detail, and so all he wanted his actors to do was do that exact thing and do it the way he had planned it.
Yeah.
Stanley was the complete opposite of that. Stanley saw actors as, that's what I've hired. I've hired an actor who can create a character, who can bring things to life. Yeah. So quite often, at least my experience, we'd have started a scene. He never told me what my motivation was. He told me very little about what he wanted me to do. And I thought, whoa, that's interesting, And I realized because he wanted to see what I came up with. And there's the story of getting angry at Jack Nicholson because he couldn't get a take right. The take was good. They say, God damn it, I'm paying you millions of dollars. You're the goddamn actor. Act.
Yeah. I think it was Shelley Duvall, wasn't it? He was kind of, there's a little bit on video. It's the only time you ever really see Stanley Kubrick losing his tempos.
I think he consciously broke her down. Directors will do that. There was a commercial director, Joe Picca, had a tendency to get actors weeping and breaking down completely, because then he would get to shoot them after that and they would be real,
Oh, of course. Yeah, because the huge difference, of course, between theatre and film is that when you're in the theatre, you've got, I did a little bit of Shakespeare and it's incredibly intense, particularly with Shakespeare, remembering the lines and things. But with film, you've got to sit around all day and then you've got to suddenly do it. So it must be terribly difficult.
It's really hard. And we were doing this yesterday. They were doing take and take. We had to shoot outside because of COVID. So we kept getting airplanes going over or a car off in the distance, things like that. So we'd be in the middle of doing something and then we'd have to stop, And then we'd do it again. And my concern was keeping alive, keeping, not just looking,
keeping awake.
Yeah, going back to Stanley, I'd just say Malcolm McDowell told me that he hated working with Stanley because Stanley would never tell him what to do. And that was the exact thing and I'm talking with Keir Delay about this a number of times, and Keir also loved the fact that Stanley wanted to know what you would do, what you were going to bring to it, because no matter how much he planned, he was always open to what might happen. he would spend months planning something, and then once we started shooting, he was ready to let all of that work go if something arose that was better that he could use. So he was always trying to, I think most directors would have stopped and not gone on further. And Stanley had a way of going further and further. Maybe I can get it a little more. Maybe we can, if we do it one more time and this time we do this, maybe we can get a little more out of it. Richard Woods, who played One Ear or whatever his name was, who I killed in the scene by the waterhole. Richard was telling me, well, you know, that master shot where you come in and whack me, we did that 42 times, you know. And I think poor Richard, I had to hit him in the head 42 times with that, you know, rubber.
What were you whacking him with? Was it rubber or plastic?
No, it was urethane with an aluminum armature. So, I mean, it still hurt, you know.
Yeah.
But the point is that every take, Stanley said, let's do it again. Oh, Dan, come over here. And he moved my fur around a little bit like that. And, you know, I really loved what you did there. But this time, maybe you could just raise your shoulder a little bit, you know, make it a little bit better. Just, that time where the way you turned a little bit, that was really good. Why don't you turn a little more? Let's do it again. And this time you even do that, turn a little more, look back at the guy, you know. And so it was always improving and getting it better, not settling. This is pretty good, but we can get it better.
You come across certain kinds of films that when you go to the theater and when you see them, you're completely surprised. They make you look at life a different way. They make you look at being human a different way. They touch areas that you don't want touched sometimes. And then there's that rarest of films where when you see it continually over years, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, you still see more in it. And what's even better is that if you're making pictures, you go back to this source for A, inspiration, and B, is to learn. To learn. And remember, when you get tired, especially if you make 10 or 12 films in your life, and you get tired, you say, why, how can I get that better? What can I do? You look at that source, you look at that inspiration, you say, well, Kubrick wouldn't let it stay this way. He would have changed that angle, he would have worked it out, he would have tried to figure out getting more time to shoot the scene this way or that way, he would have really seen it to its end. As a filmmaker, you have to tell a story to the audience, and in so doing, you have to translate it through an image, which means that you direct the eye and the heart to look in a certain way, the way you want it to be, the way you want them to see it. And I never saw anybody tell a story that way. Why does something stay with you for so many years? Why do the tracking shots and Paths of Glory stay with you? It's really a person with a very strong, powerful storytelling ability, talent, genius.
But always in a calm way, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Very, very rarely lost his temper.
I never saw Stanley angry, and I never felt intimidated by him. He also had a great sense of humor. He was fun to be around. I mean, people don't think of Stanley Kubrick that way, but he was a very nice guy, you know. If he was going to lose his temper, you wouldn't know about it. Somebody else might come and talk to you. So I was talking to Stanley, asked me if you could do, you know.
Or if you're his cleaner.
Well, he didn't want, I think it's almost an Asian thing of not losing face. He's not going to go into that room, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get back to this genius thing. Here's just a few quotes for us to chew over. There's a fine line between genius and insanity. I've erased that line. That's Oscar Levant. Have you heard of him? I'd never heard of him.
Yeah, he was a friend of George Gershwin, gifted piano player, and played some of the original performances of Gershwin's pieces. Later in life, he was a good raconteur, you know, good storyteller, an interesting character, and he was on television shows like What's My Line and things like that.
All right, okay. No great mind has ever existed without a touch of madness, and we'll talk about that in a second. That's Aristotle. It takes a lot of time to be a genius. You have to sit around so much doing nothing, really doing nothing. So this is maybe this idea of, clearing your mind of thoughts, perhaps. And then genius is the recovery of childhood at will, and that's Rimbaud. So doing a little bit of research, I actually found that the idea of a genius actually goes back to the Romans, but it wasn't. It was a much more kind of liberally used word. They had the idea that everyone could be a genius. And I've heard people talk about you're born a genius, but gradually everything gets stripped away by, having to conform and, having to fit in with society. So what about the genius and madness thing? Do you think there was any madness in John Lennon or Stanley Kubrick? I'm saying madness, not in terms of mental illness, but was there, eccentricity?
Well, it has to do with your definition of madness. In other words, if you're talking about mental illness, I don't know if it's true or not, but I would assume that mental illness is perhaps higher among geniuses than among non-geniuses.
Yeah, mere mortals.
And I think genius, again, is this mysterious thing that the person who is the genius can't fully understand it. I mean, Einstein, where did those ideas come from? I mean, where? It's not like I put 2 and 2 is 4, and I put all these things together, I get this result. These things just came, they appeared in his mind. And certainly some mathematical geniuses like that, the Indian, I can't remember, Ramachandra, it begins with R.
I don't remember, yeah.
But he came up with mathematical things that it took hundreds of years for people to actually come up with a proof of, but it just appeared in his mind. It was there. So there's this mystery, like when you were talking earlier about, I think geniuses have something to do with the word genie or spirit or, it's like something from another place that just appears. There's no road to get there, but some people, it's there, it's present, it happens. One thing I've noticed about most geniuses that I've known is that they're aware that they don't know where it's come from. We talked about Mozart not being able to write the notes down as fast as they were appearing in his head. I felt that about John sometimes, is that the music was just there. This amazing music just kept coming out of him.
Yeah, I think you said last time that some of the marijuana was actually to do with almost slowing his brain down somehow, or relaxing it to some extent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, marijuana tends to do that. It can make you stupid too, probably more often than the other.
A couple of things while you were talking. Yeah, I was thinking of going back to Bob Dylan for a second. The song "It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding." I'm sure you know that one. There's whole essays on the internet about those lyrics. And I can't believe for a second that he planned those lyrics. I mean, if you just take, the first verse, darkness at the break of noon, shadows even the silver spoon, the handmade blade, the child's balloon, eclipses both the sun and moon. To understand, too soon, there is no sense in trying, that kind of thing. He not busy being born is busy dying. I mean, I think that's genius in the sense of there's no possible way I don't think you could think about those lyrics, as you said, or plan them out. And the other thing I was thinking of when you were talking about mathematicians, I mean, people who can compute to 100 decimal points. How can you possibly...
You can't explain it.
Yeah, there's no way you can explain that. I mean, and with the link with mental illness, of course, you get to things like autism. And there's a misconception about autism, partly because of, the Rain Man film with Dustin Hoffman, that autistic people generally have special talents. But in fact, generally they don't. It's autistic savants, which Dustin Hoffman was playing.
Yeah.
But have you ever read the book The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat? Do you remember that? It's Oliver Sacks.
Yeah, I read it, but I don't remember much about it.
I don't remember loads about it, but the story where the title comes from, it was a musician and certain parts of his brain had completely stopped functioning. That's why...
Yeah. Well, it's an actual syndrome or thing that happens to people.
Absolutely, yeah. And he literally walked up to a hat stand and said, oh, hello, my dear. That's where the title comes from.
Yeah.
But the musical side of his brain was still flourishing. I can't remember in the book if the musical side was actually improved, in the way that, blind people have very good hearing and that sort of compensation. But, I always go back to Brando. In fact, I mention him so much on my podcast. He's almost become part of it. But if geniuses exist, I would say he was an acting genius. But I think his genius came from deprivation because people will know if they've read biographies, he had 2 alcoholic parents, etc., was in and out of therapy from a very, very young age. So do you think deprivation maybe, do you think it's...
Well, first of all,
go on.
I'm going back to what you said earlier, about Leopold Mozart made Mozart work so hard. I think the genius is independent of people's experience or what to do. I think geniuses can have been through deprivation. They can have been through all kinds of different situations and pressures and positive things and negative things. I think they're still just geniuses. I think that's again, you can't get there from here. It's just unique. I mean, musicians, how do they do it? I mean, I can't play music, but even anybody playing music is a bit of a genius from my perspective,
Right.
because I studied piano for 5 years and I can't play it,
Yeah.
But my ability to do mime, the first class I took when I was a student at the American Academy before I taught there, the first class I took there was a mime class with the man who was going to be my teacher, Paul Curtis. And they got up to do it, and I could just do it. Now, I was untrained, but I could do it. I could do it better than everybody in the room instantly. And I remember I came up to Paul after the class, and I said, this is amazing. I'm going to do this. I'm going to end up performing with you. And he said, go, get away, go, But 6 months later, I was studying privately with him. The end of the school year, I had to decide that I wasn't going to come back because I was already teaching mime, and they wanted me to become a teacher at the school, and I couldn't be a student and a teacher at the same time. And within a year, I was his lead performer. Can you imagine all the other people around me who were working so hard every day and things like that? Now, I realized that I was this good at it, but I then chose to work harder than everybody else. So on the weekends, when people weren't in the studio, I would be in the studio working, because now the people I was competing against was Marcel Marceau and Jean-Louis. I was, but I had this gift. It was just given me. I own it. I still have it. I'm still, a mime. And I don't know where it came from. I'm not a particularly good actor. I'm not I've trained in the method and whatnot, and I can get there if I have to. But it's not, acting itself is not a natural thing for me. But mime, if I can use my body as the medium, I can blow everybody away,
Yeah.
And I have no idea where it comes from,
Yeah. Let me tell you a funny anecdote. I used to play football, soccer, English version of football. And when I was about 8 or 9, I was in a football team. And I've always been very short-sighted. I actually had the laser treatment, so I've actually got proper eyesight for the first time in my life. I was very short-sighted, and I used to wear glasses, but I didn't want to wear glasses when I was playing football. So I was playing, I wouldn't say blind, but kind of half blind. And I used to score loads of goals.
Mm-hmm.
And I scored something like, 20, 25 goals in the season. And then the very last game of the season, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was my dad or something, we decided I would wear my glasses and then tape them around my head.
Yeah.
And the only match where I could see, I was rubbish.
Yeah.
Because when I could see the goal, I wasn't so good. When I couldn't see the goal, I was amazing.
Yeah. So that's the story of the centipede and the frog, you see. So the frog and the centipede meet, and the frog says to him, how do you do that? The centipede says, what? He says, well, you've got all these legs and they all move in sync, and it's very beautiful. And the centipede said, well, and the centipede could never walk again because he thought about it.
Yeah. Animals fascinate me as well. Cats. I mean, I think John Lennon had this as well. Absolute fascination with cats. I don't really have any evidence for it, but I just feel like cats, I don't know, I've got access to some frequencies, but of course they can't really express it.
I think animals sometimes aren't burdened by thinking about things, overthinking.
Exactly, or getting up for work and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the quotes I read earlier, if you remember, was, genius is the recovery of childhood at will. So again, like animals are almost like children. They're totally instinctive. They don't have to be polite and respectable and things like that. Well, I suppose some animals do learn to appease their owners, but you know what I mean. But yeah, very, very interesting. Did you ever meet McCartney, by the way? I guess.
Yeah, I did meet Paul. Yeah. I ran into him a couple times at parties before John and Yoko got together.
Oh, right.
Mainly I was at a big birthday party for Allen Ginsberg, and Alan was staying. He'd like to take his clothes off at parties, and he was staying.
Oh, yeah, I've heard all about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, we were talking. Alan and I were talking, and a couple other people were there, and I heard this voice behind us, and it was the Beatles. They were crashing the party, and they thought, "Wow, it's fucking Allen Ginsberg," like that, etc. And then later, Marianne Faithfull was married to John Dunbar, who had the Indica Gallery. Okay.
Yep.
And John was a friend of mine because his partner, Barry Miles had the Indica bookshop where my poetry review was being sold, and where I was doing poetry readings and whatnot. And so I knew them, and Marianne was just starting to get successful. And then they just had a baby, and they invited Jill and I to come over for dinner, and Marianne was going to cook a duck, which she never cooked before, and she was all excited about that. And so Jill and I went over, and Marianne cooked the duck, and then John, Marianne, and Jill and I, we all sat and we ate, and we were eating the duck, and we're having a really nice time and laughing. And there was a knock on the door. And so John goes and opens the door, and there's Paul McCartney with a big hobby horse that he bought for the baby. You know, and we all started laughing because it was years before the baby could use the hobby horse, you know.
Yeah.
And then Paul was talking about that Bob Dylan had just come back to the States, and Bob Dylan had given him this grass, and he didn't know how to roll it. He said, I don't know, you know, come on. So anyway, John and I said, well, we know how to roll it, you know. So we all started smoking dope, and we ended up sitting on the rug in the living room and got out all these pots and pans, and we were hitting the pans and singing and making up songs and whatnot. And then Paul was very sweet, and he drove. Jill and I didn't have a car at that point or that evening. So he drove us back to Notting Hill Gate where we were living. So that's when I first met him. I really didn't see much of him after that. And then because of Yoko, he was sort of on the other side of the other team, you know. And so I really didn't see him that much. I think I talked to him briefly once on the telephone when I was trying to get him and John to talk to each other, but don't really know him.
Yeah, as I was to say that I think his kind of everyman image, and also, I mean, let's be honest, the fact that he stayed alive. John died and he stayed alive.
Yeah.
He's almost been pilloried for that. And I don't think people generally call him a genius, but from what you were saying about people playing music, if you think of all the classic songs that Paul McCartney's written, I mean, he must have a touch of it at the very least, you know?
I think so. Even during the time when John was pissed off at him, and he had great respect for Paul and their friendship and the work that they had done. They complimented each other, you know. It's like John Yoko complimented each other. I mean, John had this almost a passive side where he wanted like somebody else to meld with. And like he described, he said once I forget which song it was, we were at a party and we realized we needed another song right away or something like that. And he said, Paul and I were sitting with our backs against a wall with people, noise all around us. And within a half hour, we had written a new hit, you know. and I Want to Hold Your Hand, I guess it was in Jane Asher's parents' basement. You know, they were sitting in an old upright piano. And Paul was the one who hit that chord, you know, that harmonic that was key. And I think that bothered John, is that John would come up with all these gorgeous, amazing stuff and things like that. And then Paul would be able to come up with a hook, you know, to just make it really a pop song, you know. Maybe he's a genius. I don't know. I know John was a genius. And I think that from my perspective, maybe Paul was a genius. He certainly has written some beautiful music.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. So let's get on to drugs. I would like you to tell me the Stanley Kubrick LSD story, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
There is a reason for it, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, when we were shooting 2001, Stanley said to me, would you and Jill like to come over to dinner at the house? Roman Polanski is going to come by, and we're doing a screening of this new film he's done, a vampire film. I guess it was The Incredible Vampire Killers, or the something like that. It was a sort of a vampire comedy. So we watched the film. It was a great film. And the Roman was about to go to Hollywood to finish everything up, and they said, Stanley said, they're going to eat you alive when you get there. So anyway, we're having dinner, and Christiana's arranged for a lovely dinner. We're sitting around the dinner table, and there's bowls of sugar, but the crystals are all different colors. Christiana had found this neat sugar that had all different colors, and Roman and I were looking at it and saying, wow, man, can you imagine if you were looking at that on acid, you know, things like that. And so the subject of LSD came up, you see. So Roman and I were going on to Stanley, well, you should try it once at least, you know. And Roman said something like, with your genius, can you imagine with LSD what you could do? And Stanley said, but that's the problem. I don't mind if people use drugs. That's their business. You know, I'm not for or against it. But I don't know how I do what I do. And I'm afraid that if I took something so mind-altering, I might not be able to do it again. And because I don't know how I do it, I would never be able to get back.
Oh, shit. He might turn into a normal person. Wow, that's interesting.
But that was typical of Stanley's way of thinking, like to never be vulnerable, to always protect,
Yeah. I guess, obviously experimenting, but I suppose it's a different type of experimenting, isn't it? It's experimenting with techniques and technology rather than drugs.
But I think it illustrates the thing about the geniuses. They don't know how they're doing what they're doing. It's a real gift. It's just something that's there. And if you don't know how you're doing it, how can you ever get it back if you lose it? Also, I think that there's a tremendous burden that geniuses have, certainly the arts, where they've done this amazing work. And now they're going to do a new piece. And there's this fear that it won't be as good. Since I don't know where that really came from, will I still have it,
Yeah.
I know that John had terrible stage fright,
Yeah.
He would usually vomit before he went on stage. And I remember before the one-to-one concert at the Garden, he was really worried because Stevie Wonder was going to be there. And he didn't want to step on Stevie in any way and things like that. And he knew Stevie was going on first. So he said, could you go ask him what songs he's going to be doing so that, I know, like that. Maybe Stevie Wonder's a genius too. I don't know. Amazing. I said, I went in to talk to him. He said, come over here. And he wanted to hold my hands while I was talking. It's a way of communication for him, And so he told me what his set list was and whatnot. I went back and told John.
And you said 3 years you were with John. Was that something like 69 to 72?
Yeah, I think it would have been July or August of 69 till about May of 72.
Okay. Yeah.
Something like that, yes.
Right. Let's talk about this drugs and creativity thing. I've had LSD experiences and I'm of the opinion that, someone who doesn't have any talent couldn't take LSD and then write, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, even though it's not apparently about that. But I really feel that it does open some doors. So what do you think drugs do to talent and creativity?
Well, I think it's a two-edged sword. In other words, I've watched people destroyed by drugs and lose their ability to be creative, but I've also watched people opened up to things that they might not have otherwise. But I think they're two different things. I think the using of drugs and creativity. Look, Charlie Parker used heroin, so everybody thought they use heroin and be cool and play cool music.
Yeah.
But a lot of very cool musicians, I think Dizzy Gillespie wasn't using drugs, a lot of, I've thought about it a lot, and I really sort of come to the feeling that it doesn't matter either way,
I make the distinction, I suppose, between, let's say, on one side, marijuana and LSD, and then on the other side, things like speed and cocaine and heroin. I can't imagine. Yeah. I imagine cocaine would probably give you a temporary rush of energy, perhaps, but I can't imagine that speed, cocaine, and heroin have got anything to do with creativity. However, I still maintain. If you take Coltrane, for example, some people don't really like his sort of psychedelic jazz, but I don't think there's any coincidence that when he was doing LSD, he produced those albums. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but those kind of mid-60s albums. And in a funny way, almost created psychedelic jazz. And I don't think it's whether it's better or worse. I just think it's different.
It's different. I think that's the thing. It is better or worse. I think if a creative person does anything, falls in love, takes drugs, has a hot shower, just something that triggers and, that steers their creativity in a certain way. But the creativity is the creativity. That's there. One has that. Also, I think we talk about it a lot because we went through a period where there was a lot of experimentation with drugs. So people think, Bob Dylan, could he have written all that stuff if he wasn't getting stoned all the time? And he probably could have,
Let's say, here's a gentleman right here.
How have drugs affected your music writing?
How have drugs affected your music writing?
Drugs have not affected my music writing any more than cornflakes, living in America, not living in America, going on tour, living with 4 men, living with 1 woman. The drugs were no more a help or a hindrance to creating, and I don't believe in creation, but to writing songs than any other experience I've had in life. None was more important, i.e. drugs are not more important than my environment. I think my environment is more important than any drugs or outside influence that came when I was a teenager. I think most of the things I write about are basic things that come from me that I've had all my life, you know.
A lot of creative people do not want to use drugs. It's like Andy Warhol has surrounded himself with all these crazy people all the time and doing things. But Andy was stone cold sober, you know, just doing exactly what he was doing all the time, you know.
Well, Zappa was another example. You know, if you looked at Frank Zappa, you wouldn't believe in a million years that he was anti-drugs. But apparently, I think his drugs were sort of coffee and cigarettes and sex and work.
Yeah, well, everybody has their own drugs, you know.
Exactly.
I mean, it's for me, it's coffee ice cream now, you know.
For me, it's podcasting, I suppose. But, I mean, famously, do you know that Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland, used to suffer migraines? And apparently they didn't cause his work, but, you know, they had an effect.
Yeah.
And I read up on that, and that can definitely happen. I think really it's about brain chemistry, and what you were saying earlier about the geniuses, you know, they just have a different brain, you know, different mind. And they're not all the same, as you said, but they're different from, I don't know, the average Joe, let's say.
Yeah, and again, there's this element of mystery all the time. You can't get there from anywhere else. It comes from another place. This secret island off someplace that's, you know, sending it to people.
The island of genius.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else we could talk about, or shall I wrap up? I've gone through my notes.
Well, I think that was pretty good. Yeah. I learned some things, you know.
That's good. So did I.
Yeah.
All right. So what are you doing at the moment then? You did tell me that you get sent lots of stuff. Do you still do 2001 related events? Do they still come up?
Yeah, they do, you know, and more and more, interestingly enough, over the years, to the point now where, you know, sometimes it's just too many. And it's interesting, there's more and more 2001 stuff, and there's more and more John Yoko stuff. In the old days, for years, you know, occasionally I'd do an interview and things like that. And now I just did a BBC film yesterday. I'm doing this with you today. I've, you know, people are all the time wanting to talk. I'm getting to the point where I'm saying, maybe should I be doing so much? But I like it because I loved John so much, and I love Yoko so much, and I have so much respect for them as artists and as people. If I could set the records straight with all the junk that's said about them, you know, we're on a pretty good track now as far as the world's perception of them. Because I think we've gotten there. I know Yoko is being treated decently now and getting the respect she deserves. And I certainly think 2001 doesn't need me to say anything anymore. You know? I mean, it said it all in 1968, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think 50th anniversaries are very attractive, aren't they? Because, you know, it's half a century. It's kind of special. Just very finally, when was the last time you actually watched 2001? I mean, I don't imagine you'd watch it by choice, but was there a screening event? When was the last time? Can you remember?
It was about a year or two ago. I've seen My Sequence a couple times. You know, we had a screening in January at the Museum of Moving Image in New York, and Katerina Kubrick and I and Keir DeLay, we did a Q&A at the beginning. We gave a little lead into the movie, but I didn't watch it. I just left and then came in at the end of the movie. With the audience, you know. No, I was off signing autographs. You know, you get cash to sign your name. You know, my agent hands me a thing and a pen, and I think, what's the name? Jim. To Jim, all the best. Moonwatcher, Dan Richter. And so, you know, I do that sometimes. You know, but I did the last full screening. I was at the Museum of Moving Image the year before. It was the what's that director who did a version? Oh, I can't remember anybody's name anymore.
Oh, did a sequel?
No, there was a new. He did a clean, restored version. His name. But anyway, so I saw it there because I wanted to see what he did with it. And then that same year, which was 2 years ago, Warner's was putting out a fancy disc set of all of Stanley stuff, and they had another cleaned up version of 2001. And they invited me over. I went over to the studio, and there was we had a private screening, you know, for people who were involved. And, you know, we got up and said hi to people, you know.
Yeah. Do you feel like sometimes these cleaned up versions, you were talking about mystery earlier, there's a grainy quality about older films. Do you think they were almost detracting? Because if the image is too clear, you can see everything too clearly.
I think 2001, Stanley was trying to get as much clarity as possible.
Right.
But, you know, he's working in 70 millimeter and doing, some of that's very immense amount of light to get really crisp stuff. The print I saw at Warner's was really good. I thought it was great. And I thought this other print, the guy was trying to get a bit of the old quality or something. I didn't really understand it. But now in older films, I don't know. I think I would like to see them the way the artists created them, whatever that was, without the nostalgia of looking back. It's an old thing, And I think a lot of silent films we see, the speed isn't right, particularly the early stuff. An interesting example is the New Zealand director, Peter
Jackson.
Jackson did this thing about taking old World War I footage.
They Shall Not Grow Old?
They Shall Not Grow Old. And I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, it was.
Beautiful. But one of the things he did is that he developed software that could determine the speed rates, because they were using handheld cameras and things were going off, and the speed was determined by the speed that they turned the crank. So a lot of the times the speed is varying in some of this old stuff, So it's a little faster, a little slower, like that. And also has to do with how many frames per second and all that kind of stuff, where they were shooting in slower rates. So he developed software to smooth that out and get it at the right weight. And when it's right, suddenly it comes to life, because again, our instinctively, what we were talking about earlier, that we know what's true and not true,
Yeah.
Then he brought in the color, got the colors right, even to the extent where he sent people to the locations to take pictures and to figure out what the colors were, And then he got actors who were from the area. They knew that this was the regiment from the Midlands, and so they got Midland people with voices to do the overdubbing. And in the movie they start with the original stuff in a small part of the screen, and slowly over the first 15 minutes or so, he starts adding the stuff. It's coming till finally it comes to life, and it works. You know. So I don't know. I would like to, if Charlie Chaplin made a film, I would like to see the way it looked in the theaters at the time that Charlie made it.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of have both nowadays, can't you, really?
Yeah.
But I mean, I tell you, the Beatles stuff looks fabulous nowadays. Yeah. I mean, that stuff, the Strawberry Fields Forever video from 67, because it's so dark, the original one. I mean, I think they did mean it to be have a sort of, I don't know, early evening kind of feel, but so clear now. And I think you're saying Peter Jackson, obviously we're going to get this Let It Be film. And I think people are already a little bit, I mean, I don't really care. I mean, I'd be happy.
I think anything Peter Jackson does is going to be gorgeous.
Right.
I think that's, and I think it gets back to who's doing it again. I know Neil Aspinall had made a Beatles film back in about 1971. They never released it. Broke Neil's heart because he put his heart and soul into it. But there was a lot of footage, and one of the problems with a lot of the footage, and I think Peter Jackson will deal with this, is that it wasn't considered that important at the time. We were just starting in those days thinking in terms of creating visual content to go with music, Yeah. Before that, it was all just sort of casual, Peter Jackson a lot of that old stuff he'll really clean up and bring it to life.
They're worried that he's going to make it seem too nice, in terms of the narrative. But again, I don't care, because I'm just looking forward to this amazing footage. Because we don't know the narrative anyway, I mean, you know more than me because you were around. But I mean, I always tell my listeners this is my best guess.
Yeah, there was some footage. I took the Magical Mystery Tour, which wasn't a particularly good film, but I reformatted that. Took the original 16 and reformatted that. Cut off the tops and bottoms. So each take, what I would do is I had a mat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3 was you just cut off the same amount of the top and bottom like that, and put it on a Oxbury lathe, and I guess we blew it up to create a 35 millimeter negative. So there's probably some pretty good. Some of that will be nice, but the film wasn't that good.
Yeah, it's kind of messy, but I kind of love it. Something about it I like.
I feel about it. I
so
love
iconic.
John with a pitchfork putting spaghetti on the plate.
Yeah, he was doing an impression of Bobby Dykins, which was his mother's lover, who was a waiter. And apparently, according to John, this guy Dykins used to dip his hand in the butter and use it as like Brill cream. That's disgusting.
Oh.
But John Lennon had a dream about shoveling spaghetti on a woman's plate, and he combined that with the Bobby Dykins. Yeah, that's a great.
So it was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
You know, I don't know. Everybody was having a lot of fun in those days.
Yeah, I know.
Were we?
Yeah. Sounds like it. Listen, Dan, thanks a lot. I know you do a lot of these interviews and discussions, and I tried my damnedest to,
Well, I enjoyed
the same old thing.
You talk in a relaxed, and you got enough time to really talk about things in a serious. I hate to use the word serious, but thorough and thoughtful way.
Yeah,
so
I'm not the BBC.
Yeah, no, they did a very good job.
Oh, did they? Oh, okay.
I guess they did. I don't know. I was basically didn't want to catch COVID. That was my concern.
Right, yeah. Oh, we're in December, by the way, listeners. This is probably going out in January or February. Anyway, just stay on the line for a second and we'll just have a quick chat. But
Sure.
Thanks very much. And good luck with everything.
My pleasure.
So there you have it. That was episode 62. Thanks again to Dan for being on the show. And I'm pleased that, as you heard at the end, he learned a few things from me there, and that our discussions aren't just a chore of having to talk about Stanley Kubrick and John Lennon. And again, as he said, he's happy to set the record straight. So I hope we've given the audience as well, you guys, something to think about in terms of the genius thing. I'm quite on the fence about it. I think, as I said, being an English teacher, I have a sort of love-hate relationship probably with dictionaries, in that the definitions help you up to a point, but then things get into popular usage and certain terms get overused. I can't remember which podcast it was on, but I was talking about not only genius, but also the word depressed. People are a bit sad and they say, I'm depressed. That was probably on my other show, actually. Yeah, I forgot to plug, by the way, Life and Life Only. My third podcast is going strong now. I've just recorded the first discussion and I've got another one coming up as well. So there's that one, and Film Gold, soon to release a review of The Social Network with a member of my family, in fact. So that'll be fun. The next show is going to be with Matt Sergio. And we're going to be going back into, let's say, conspiracy land. And I don't say that as a pejorative. I've made that perfectly clear before. I think conspiracies do exist. There are other ones which have perhaps been discredited. But Matt has a blog called, I think he has two blogs, in fact. But the one I know fairly well is The Occult Beatles. So you might want to check that out ahead of our talk. And that'll probably be out in a couple of weeks. And look forward to cracking on with editing that and seeing what comes out at the end. Finally, once again, if you'd like to support the show with a PayPal donation, or I've got greatest hits on bandcamp.com, it'll be in the show notes. Anything you can give in these difficult times is much appreciated. But otherwise, just keep listening, keep sharing the links with others, tell others about the show, and there'll be another episode along soon. So thank you very much for listening. Take care, all the best, and goodbye.